Hi beautiful souls, it's Tan back here on this channel for you with a video today, and we're going to be talking about Sun-Pluto aspects in the natal chart in this video. I know that there's a lot of you guys out there who probably have Sun aspecting Pluto somewhere, and today I just want to talk about the hard aspects between Sun and Pluto in a natal chart. So that's the Sun square Pluto, Sun conjunct Pluto, Sun opposite Pluto, and Sun inconjunct to Pluto in the natal chart, because these are really tricky waters to navigate. And so if you have any of these aspects, comment below what sign your Sun is in, and of course what sign Pluto is in, and what aspect are they making, and what's the orbs, because orbs matter a lot. So for example, if your Sun is in 1 degree of Scorpio and Pluto is in 1 degree of Scorpio, that's a 0 degrees orb. That's going to be felt very strongly in your chart. But if your Sun is in 1 degree of Scorpio and Pluto is around 8 degrees of Scorpio, you'll probably still feel this, but not as strongly, shall we say. And so yeah, so I'm going to keep in mind there. And I also highly recommend that you check out my introduction video to Pluto, what that energy is all about first. So I'll provide a link to that up above in the description box below, and then you can come back and watch this video, because Pluto is a very complex planet. It's much more than what we think. Pluto is the key to enlightenment in the chart. It's the key to wholeness and feeling totality and complete in our chart. But that's not always an easy path. And here, let's get into it then. And so when it comes to the Sun aspecting Pluto, what's not easy and what's being challenged when it comes to being enlightened and being whole is your ego. That's the main thing about the Sun, is that it rules the ego structures that have been built. And Pluto wants to make a change to that. And when it's in a hard aspect to the Sun, it's going to be a forced change or forced transformation that you wouldn't initially want. Even if it's a conjunction, you wouldn't initially want it, but we'll go into each aspect individually a little bit later on, but yet you will face it at some point in your life. If you are coming with a Pluto, you're going through a Pluto transit, that is going to make these themes more potent for you. That's usually when it happens, the biggest transformation. And so the Sun also rules the way that your father or the male authority figure in your life builds up that ego structure to give you a sense of self-confidence and self-esteem. And so therefore, with all Sun-Pluto aspects, there is a challenging male authority figure who didn't quite build up that ego structure in the best way possible, and how that differs will be with regards to the aspects. The other thing that this is going to show is with regards to your career. So if you have Sun with Pluto, at some point in your life, there tends to be a very dramatic or drastic career change into something that's more true and authentic to who you are. These people, if you have this, do very well in all types of 8th house careers, whether that is anything from psychology to the occult to investment, the stock market, running a business, transformative types of careers, sometimes emergency life and death situations, depending on the sign of the Sun and the house and things like that. And so there's a lot of power there that you can use to help other people with the darker things of life. If you have this aspect, and it's going to be dependent on how much are you willing to first transform yourself so that you can help transform others. There is also a sexual theme that can come up, because the Sun does rule your life force and your vitality, and therefore anything that is holding back the sexual life force energy within you is going to be reawakened through the transformation of Pluto as well. The way that I want to kind of do this video is that as I go through each of the aspects, I want to bring up a particular heroic villain. I'm going to call him heroic villain from movies and series that I feel the psychology and the development of that character's psychology reflects each of the Sun-Pluto aspects. And I'm kind of excited to do this because I feel like it's very like, I don't know, it helps to give much more life and character to the psychology of Sun-Pluto. But I also hope that it's not going to offend anybody. And guys, please don't take the characters that I'm talking about here and their lives literally. It's meant as a metaphor for the development of the psychology of a person. So we're going to start off first by looking at the Sun being in a conjunction to Pluto. And when the Sun is coming to a conjunction with Pluto, conjunctions brings intense blending. So what you have to realize is Sun and Pluto don't like each other naturally. The Sun is the brightest planet in the sky in the solar system. Pluto is the darkest. And when they're blending, they actually don't want to blend. But somehow, the Sun-Pluto person has a way of feeling like this blending is okay. And so it doesn't bring much awareness. All the other aspects, the opposition, the square, and the inconjunction, brings a lot of awareness to your darkness. The Sun conjunct Pluto person is not initially going to have much awareness with regards to how their ego is so much identified with the darkness of life, that the darker things of life is actually diminishing, or how do I say it? It's actually dimming their actual light of the Sun. But they don't see that. What they do see, they see the Sun and how they feel. The Sun conjunct Pluto person feels like they're very that it's okay. Yeah, that it's okay to shine light on all the darker things of life and to feed off of that, even though it can cause them to self-sabotage or can cause them to sabotage other aspects of their life. They feel that initially, without awareness, that is actually okay, unlike the other aspects, which feels the intensity of having to have some self-control. The villain, the heroic villain here, I chose Hannibal Lecter. And I actually really like him. I think that he's got quite a depth of character. So the reason behind his psychology, and this is true for all Sun-Pluto aspect, is that there's some kind of trauma while they were growing up. It's usually trauma surrounding the father. And in the case of Hannibal Lecter, it was him watching his sister, well, not watching, but him finding out that his sister was being eaten by the soldiers during the war, and he became a cannibal himself. But later on, he was also a great psychiatrist as well. So there's this theme, how the Sun conjunct Pluto person, like Hannibal Lecter, feeds off of their trauma from the past and uses the traumas of the past in an unconscious way to take, sometimes it's like revenge, or it can be control of certain things in their life. And they, in the career life, these people are very ambitious and they will do a lot to get the power in their career, right? Because the Sun also represents your career, to the point where it can blind them to their true and authentic power. See, they feel like they want to be able to get power in their career, but when you're feeling like that, you're ultimately giving power to something else outside of yourself, which is you're giving power to success, which is the Sun. You're giving power to the recognition of the career, rather than seeing the innate power that you have within inside of yourself. So you see how Hannibal Lecter is very much he has goals, right? He's very ambitious in his the story, his killing. But there's so much more going on underneath himself. There's a lot of holding on to the past, the traumas of the past, and feeling like it becomes his identity without him realizing it or not. Of course, if you're watching this video and this is happening in your own life, it's not going to be as extreme as this. Like I said, it's a metaphor only. So please don't take these characters, any of them, literally. And the association or the blending of the ego structure with all of the traumas and the darker things of life happens very early on. the identity is also very much attached and blended to other people's resources. So the person, what I've seen with Sun conjunct Pluto people is they usually feel that it's okay to give away a lot of their resources and to get a lot of their resources from other people. And sometimes they may not have a lot of balance with regards to whether, like what's the negotiation around that, or how much do they have to, and when, or if it ever happens, if that's a loan to pay back or to get back from that loan. So there can be like abuse of resources that happens, whether that's the Sun Pluto person or of the other. Their characteristics, if you have the Sun conjunct Pluto person, because you're identifying with all the darker things of life, you're generally not somebody who is very open. And you feel like that's correct, that's the right way to be. The right way to be is to not be very open about your identity, sometimes it's your face on social media to other people. But it's going to make you harder to be very open to yourself. And that's the illusion of Pluto here. Pluto is searching for security through others. And so it makes it feel like it's okay if you have a partner, a career, success, sex, money, other things outside of yourself to give you power. But ultimately, something's going to happen in your life at some point where you lose it. You face loss. That's what Pluto does. Pluto is about life and death mainly. So you may lose that job, you may lose that money, you may lose that relationship that had given you some kind of superficial power, because it's ultimately power from the outside. Or when you lose all of those things, you may begin to really question what inner power means for you. And this can be something that happens cyclically for the Sun conjunct Pluto person, until they really fully purge or transform. And so I say this because it may not be a one-time thing, definitely not. It can be something that has to keep happening to them, because the way the planet just really blends, one loss may not be enough to kind of jerk the Sun conjunct Pluto person into doing the inner work. But continuous extreme loss, a pattern of that, begins to make the person realize, where does my inner power really lie? Where your inner power lies is in the higher vibration of your sun. You can check, for example, your gene keys or human design, which gate that sun falls in, and look at the gift or the city level of that, and then see that's where your inner power really lies. And the gene key has a lot of tremendous wisdom with regards to self-reliance, inner power, and things like that. So you can look at that, or you can just look at the sign that the sun is in and see the qualities that is written or been said or been studied about that particular sign with regards to the self. The parts of it where it's not, writing things to you, or where you're not reading something that is about you relying on the other, but it's about you and yourself. What is so amazing, and what are the things that really give you confidence in the way that you are, without any reliance on other people? That's what can happen here. So any type of deconditioning, purification, somatic work, therapy, anything that gets you to take away the need for power from the other into the power of the self is going to be very important. And when you do, if you have the Sun conjunct Pluto, you are some of the toughest, and like nothing really can get you down if you're using it correctly. And with regards to the father figure, what I've noticed with this placement is that the father, usually there is some darkness or some taboos that you faced very early on since you were a child, and the father sometimes tries to protect the child from this, but the child knows from the very beginning. So this can be like discovering that your father as somebody who, let's say, a detective or some kind of darker career, some kind of like career that has to do with crime or life and death. And this was disturbing to the child, because as a child, we're born innocent. And so this is a fragmentation process that happens. And the father may, talk to the child about it and try to explain what he's doing. But no matter what the father did, the child still knew very early on about the darker taboo things in life. So that's what happened there. And because of that, the self-esteem and the self-confidence was rocky since the beginning, because the child subconsciously feels like no matter what it is they try to do in life, they have to do it to the extreme. That's the imprinting of the father, the extreme of the father. Whatever they decide to do, there's a subconscious sort of programming there already that it will be the same way as the father. It will be as extreme as the father. It will be about getting power from the outside. It will be about proving like the father did, until, of course, you decondition with regards to like what we talked about earlier. So now I'm going to go into the Sun opposite Pluto. And so when we have Sun opposite Pluto in the natal chart, we see more self-awareness as opposed to the Sun conjunct Pluto. And the character, the heroic villain that I want to associate with the Sun opposite Pluto is Rasmus from The Rain, the series The Rain. Not sure if you guys have seen it. If you haven't, this is going to be a spoiler. So basically in that series, there is a rain that carries a virus, and it begins to wipe out the population. And Rasmus, him and his sister, and their father was the man who was doing a research on this particular virus, and their father tried to protect both of them from getting the virus, and he succeeded because they didn't get the virus, they survived. But the reason why the father was protecting both of them from the virus is because Rasmus himself carried the immunity for the virus. But the immunity couldn't be extracted yet until he was at the right age and things like that. And so they had to keep him alive so that in the future he would be able to bring the immunity to the world. And Rasmus did not know this from the start, but later on when he was older, he realizes that he did carry the immunity, but in order to bring out the healing properties of this immunity, he had to let the virus he had to make friends. Yes, he has to make friends with the virus inside of him. And there is a lot of resistance to that, because the moment that he knew that he carried the virus, he was like, he was like running around and kind of like really panicking, and then kind of like, his sister was trying to save him, and everybody's trying to save Rasmus. But you see, the Sun opposite Pluto person goes through this theme in their life. Their father was trying to protect them from the darker side of life since they were very young. And the father succeeded, because for the most part of the child's life, they were happy and sunny. And I have Sun opposite Pluto in my chart, so this is something that I also feel, like my father was that type of a dad that he really tried to protect me from the darker things of life, but he was very dark himself. And only when I reached my first Saturn return did I begin to unravel the stuff around my father that I kind of like knew, but like it didn't sink in, it didn't do anything about it. That's kind of what happens there, is that later on in your life, if you have this, you're faced with like a shock regarding the darkness of life and of your father, and how it's like, I've lived my life all this time, but I never considered my shadow, I never considered the darker parts of me. And there's a projection theme that happens with oppositions, meaning that through your relationships, you begin to learn about your darkness. And so the way that relationships will do this to you is that it will kind of, you may be, for example, with friends, or depending on which house your sun is in, either friends, or maybe it's a colleague, or partners, love, romantic relationships, or bosses, that you have power struggle with. Maybe they try to control you, try to manipulate you, and there can be abuse there in relationships. And you get out of that relationship, and then you experience being in another relationship where now it's you who it's like after having been exposed to that, you feel like you could do that to another person, What if you just controlled them? What if you just abused them? What if you just manipulated them? But you really tried not to do it because it's an opposition, so it brings awareness. And so you see how something that you saw in another now becomes you. The darkness that you saw in another now becomes you, and now you really have to work with it. So it's kind of like Rasmus, how like when he found out that he had the virus inside of him, he really didn't want to accept that. And all he wanted was just his sister to make him better, when the truth was that if he just embraced this, the virus could never kill him anyway. And so if he just embraced that and made friends with that, he could really help and save a lot of people. And when he didn't, every time he got angry, he was like a volcano. This is what happens with Sun opposite Pluto. You can be like a volcano. It's like the virus just, whenever he gets angry, it just, and it goes into the air and it infiltrates and infects all the people around him. And he was destructive in that sense. But all he had to do was embrace and work with his shadow and make friends with the shadow, make friends with your dragon, rather than trying to fight it off or trying to run away from it. That's what can happen here. So the characteristic of somebody who had a Sun opposite Pluto, they can swing back and forth from being open, being the light, being the sun, and then falling into depressive states or feeling unsuccessful, feeling unworthy to the extreme, and then feeling super successful, super confident to the extreme, and then it goes back and forth. And sometimes it leads to a bit of like this disappointment in relationships, where the partner of the Sun opposite Pluto person may see one side of them, usually see the sun, and then throughout the relating they begin to see the person's Pluto, and they may back off a little bit and then try to control the Pluto person's Pluto. That's when the shadow comes out, that's when the projection comes out. But depending on your partner, like if the partner of the Sun opposite Pluto person is really Plutonic, they may, Plutonic in a good way, an evolved Pluto version way, they may be able to handle you working through your dark stuff. And that can kind of be transformative types of relationships there. So yes, if you have the Sun opposite Pluto, then don't run away from your shadows. Really do shadow work. You can be amazing at shadow work. You can make shadow work conscious for yourself. You can like kind of sit back and be the observer of the way that the shadow is playing out in your life and practically work with that. Reassess the shadows that had come out through your past relationships. Embrace it. Know that it makes you whole rather than separates you, because it really doesn't. The shadow is only trying to make us whole. There's a difference between shadow and evil. You're not doing anybody, you're not going to harm anybody through the shadow. Something that's evil becomes evil because it hurts other people. There's a bad intention behind it. But the shadow, if you're not accepting it, yes, can hurt others. But when you really accept it, there's only genius and gift there. And just like the Sun conjunct Pluto, you have the same gifts of being able, it was a little bit different this one, because you are going to be more of the type of person who can understand the suffering, the shadows, the darkness in others, and you can be there for them. You can help them in their transformation. You don't shy away from other people's darkness, but also don't shy away from your own. Okay, so let's talk about the Sun square Pluto. So the square brings internal intensity and conflict. A really great heroic villain to summarize the psychology behind the Sun square Pluto person, I thought of Yennefer from The Witcher. And you know how Yennefer, while she was growing up, she had some deformities and she had like a hunchback. So it's really something inside of herself. There's like this, because the sun represents your vitality, there can be like a feeling of intense power inside of you, but you don't know how to use that, and you can be illusioned by thinking that you have to suppress that inner power for your image to be good to other people, kind of like Yennefer. And so Yennefer actually went through a very intense transformation of her physical body, right? If you've seen that scene in The Witcher, which is kind of like that. And then she gained a lot of power afterwards. You know, she had a character, like her aura was very intimidating. Sun square Pluto people have somewhat of an intimidating aura about them. They carry both the Sun here and the Pluto here on one shoulder, the Sun on one shoulder, the Pluto on one shoulder, and it can be seen clearly by the world, unlike the Sun conjunct Pluto where it just blends. This one, it's like when people meet you, they see, your confidence. There's something confident about this person, something bright and sunny about this person, but they also see very clearly that this person has a lot of power and self-control of that power. But the power is right underneath the surface, and people can feel this intensely about you. Just like Yennefer, the father of the Sun square Pluto person, there tends to be an intense power struggle between them. It's not an explosive power struggle like a Sun opposite Pluto, which I should have mentioned. There can be a lot of explosions with the father. And not like the Sun conjunct Pluto where you're just identifying with the darkness of your father. But this one, it's like the father was somehow competing, shall we say. And this is not consciously, but it's a little bit more unconscious that the father was somehow subconsciously trying to push or try to get the Sun square Pluto person to be successful, to be confident in a particular way, when the Sun square Pluto person feels like that's too much and they want to have it in their own way. So there can be themes of walking around eggshells around the father and subconsciously feeling like if they did the right thing, the father would prove, but yet they don't want to do the right thing. They want to do what they want to do with their power. Then the father may not approve and the father may challenge that. And so that's kind of like what's happening there. Kind of similar to the Sun opposite Pluto, you can go from feeling successful to really not successful from time to time. And sometimes you feel them together very intensely, like you're successful, but yet you want more. Kind of like that, but not sure how to get more. Unlike the Sun conjunct Pluto, that's just going to run with the power, right? This is like, I want more power. I'm already feeling successful, but I also want more power. But how do I do that? How do I put them together? So just like all the other aspects, with this one, it's also about internalizing that power as well and extracting the gift of both the sign and the gene key, or the human design gate of your Sun and your Pluto. What is the gift of those? How can you use them? And a really good way of working with such a square can also be to know that whichever house the Sun is in, use the Sun in that house without having to use the Pluto, because the Pluto is always going to be there. And the fact that you try to prove that you have the power with the Sun in that house, that's what makes you intimidating for people, and sometimes not in the most positive way, because the square is so intense. Usually you just choose one or the other planet consciously and let the other one loose, surrender to the other one, it will still be there. So for example, if you have a Sun in the 10th house, and Pluto in the first house, right? Use the Sun in the 10th house. Focus on that Sun in the 10th house. Climb that career ladder, be that manager, have fun while you're doing it, be confident while you're doing it. Take the Pluto out for a little bit, because that Pluto in the first house is going to try to use your instinct and detect when people are a threat to you, and that's going to come across as like scary for people in your work environment. You don't even have to use the Pluto. The Pluto can be there at the back, kind of just, as a friend alongside you there, and you'll know when to use it when it should be used. That kind of made sense? So, and I would recommend, yes, focus more on that Sun. Let the Pluto be the friend there. Use it when it needs to be used, because the square is like, the opposition is like balance, right? The conjunction is like blending, and so with the conjunction, you also want to be able to see what is being blended, and with the opposition, it's out of balance, so you want to balance it. With the square, it's this, kind of intense pulling back and forth, and there's nothing else that we can do when you have a square except choose one of them, go with one of them. The square makes, in this book, it's written in one of the books I read on aspects, that the square is like you're driving down a street and then you get to a corner and you didn't see this corner coming. So in that moment, you have to make an sudden turn right away. So you have to make a choice. When you have the square, choice to choose, use one or the other, because the driver is still there. You still be there to use it. You know, the other planet will still be there next to you, available when you need it. You don't have to try to do too much with it. That kind of makes sense with the square there. Okay, so now we're going to look at the last one, which is the inconjunction. This is a very interesting aspect between the Sun and Pluto. And with inconjunctions, you're going to have to keep the orbs pretty close, so 2.5 maximum for the orbs between Sun and Pluto in conjunction. So with the Sun in conjunct Pluto, this is something that happens like it seemingly feels like an external event. Yes, it seemingly feels to you like there are a lot of external things that happen outside of your control. And so the heroic villain that I want to use for this one is the Joker. Oh, I love the Joker, guys. There's a political theme that can be surrounding Sun in conjunct Pluto as well. So you see how the life of the Joker is like, he has a laughing disease, right? And so with regards to his career, you know, his mother, his family situation, when you watch his life, it feels like there's a lot of things that happen there that's outside of his control. Like, I cried watching the first parts of the Joker movie because I really felt so bad from him from the deepest part of my heart that he felt so powerless, and it felt like there was just so much trauma, so much darkness there, and that he couldn't really do much about it. And so what happens with the fathering figure of this one is that the father was either too appropriate, so the child doesn't really have a chance to explore anything taboo in their life. There's nothing there. Or the father was way inappropriate, and we tend to see, usually it's the father being the more inappropriate person or type, that the child was just experiencing inappropriacies really early on in their life. And so the person who has a Sun in conjunct Pluto is going to go about their life and kind of putting Pluto away somewhere. Like, it's just not there. If the father was really inappropriate, they put the Pluto away because they couldn't handle it. If the father was too appropriate, they put the Pluto away because they don't know what that's all about. And unlike the opposition, where, like I said, like the opposition, you also put the Pluto away, but the opposition makes relationships and projections very clear for you. The inconjunction makes Pluto come out like an exposure in your life, if that kind of made sense. It kind of comes out of nowhere at first. It feels like it comes out of nowhere, and it feels like the people in your life is what is causing it to come out. So kind of like, you know, when the Joker was bullied and things like that, like, it just like, it feels like, where's all this coming from? But when you make an inconjunction your own power, just like the Joker did, actually. There was the scene, you know, when he was being invited into the show and he was about to become famous. Also, it feels like suddenly the power is coming to you, but it's not. It's that he tried to, you know, figure out, and there's going to be trials and errors with regards to, like, what is power, what does that look like, and there's going to be a theme as well of what if I could overthrow authorities, and what if I could, you know, because that's what the Joker does, right? He really, you know, in Gotham was really corrupted, and he was the one who could see that corruption very clearly and actually was aware of it and tried to do something about it. But because he's operating also at the lower frequency of this aspect, what we also see is that he self-sabotaged, which can also be something that happens with this one, is that the moment that he finally had the power now, he was in the show and he was about to be famous, and he could do a lot with his fame or his popularity, right? He could really change the world in a radical, in a good way. He could try to change Gotham in a good way, but he ended up shooting the show host instead and sabotaging himself, if you see what I mean there. Because when he shot the host of the show, he's really making it his point very provocatively clear that there's someone here that we need to be able to tear down or to overthrow. So he would sabotage himself so that, to prove his point, if that kind of makes sense, to prove his point about the people in power, the people of authority. And that is coming from him still rooted in the past and feeling like, well, he's been through hell. There's not much else that he needs to get himself out of. Might as well just sabotage myself again. The reason why you may do, things that can self-sabotage yourself is because the Sun conjunct Pluto person hasn't shifted their paradigms or the deconditioning that external things are controlling them. So he subconsciously feels like he's still, he's still rooted in the fact that everything that's happened in his life happened outside of his control, that even if he had the power, it's not really going to get him anywhere. So there can be this like depressive way of thinking, and so he's like, he would rather choose the provocative route, choose the more destructive route, and take power that way. And so the way to work with this aspect is to transcend your suffering first before feeling like you are ready to give power to the people. Try to give free will, power, authority to the people rather than the people who were in authority, but give like people power. Because it's something that's more in the body even. So there's really not a lot of awareness that's going to happen here until you transcend your suffering of the past. And the Joker hasn't done that. He hasn't sat with his feelings of darkness, purging from his actual physical body. He hasn't done any of that. And when I say purging from the physical body, that means to really do some somatic work, somatic therapy, to any kind of body cleansing and purification that has to happen there. Because if he had done that, if he had fully let go of his past, he wouldn't feel like when he had that power on stage, he wouldn't feel like he doesn't even feel this. It's really unconscious. He wouldn't even unconsciously sabotage himself anymore. You have an ability, if you have this aspect, to be very self-conscious, to really even be able to transcend all limitations of who you think you are, transcend your astrological natal chart, transcend your human design chart, transcending it all. But in order to do that, you have to be able to feel your suffering very deeply, which the Joker didn't do. Getting inner peace is where you find your power with Sun and conjunct Pluto. When you transcend suffering, you realize that at the bottom of your deepest pain, and the Joker would have realized this as well, that at the bottom of his deepest pain, there was peace there. There could be peace inside himself, and he could bring peace to his city rather than chaos to the city. Yeah, I really feel that. This is going to be the last thing that I want to say for all Sun Pluto aspects here is find your peace. Find your peace. Peace is your power. Peace is your power. Peace is very powerful. When nobody else outside of you, nothing else externally, whether that is a relationship, a career, an authority figure, if they cannot disturb your peace of mind anymore, if they cannot trigger your past traumas, if they cannot trigger your deepest wounds anymore, that is when you have peace, and that is the greatest power. Only when you can do that can you transform other people with all of your capabilities and potential. That is going to be my interpretation of Sun Pluto aspects in the natal chart, hard aspects. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button below if you haven't. If you already have, then thank you very much for coming along on my astrology channel. And yeah, following along with all the videos there, and also write your experiences of Sun Pluto in the comments below as well if you have this aspect. If there's anything else you want to add, do add them below, because maybe I just didn't cover everything. There's a lot there. Any other heroic villains you want to associate with each of the Sun Pluto aspects, write them in the comments below. And yes, beautiful souls, that's it. Have a beautiful day. Bye.